Time and time again, when I hear about polyamorous or polygamous relationships that fail when money and resource sharing gets involved, it always points back to the lack of spiritual foundation from the beginning. My name is Asha Sekhmet. I am the founder of the Maji Community. And on this channel, welcome. We talk about all things spirituality, non-monogamous relationships that build towards sustainable community, sovereignty for the new earth, and tribalism. All right, so let's get into these poly story times that I just want to correlate to my original statement of the importance of having a spiritual foundation. Okay. Recently, I was speaking with a sister about her experience in her previous polyamorous relationship. And she talked about how things were going well at one point, right? Businesses that they started, money that they were accumulating into six figures, and they lost it all, and then they separated. So they're no longer in that poly dynamic anymore. Now, it sounded very similar to another man that I had met. It was a brother, I would say maybe a year ago or so, who did a polygamous relationship as well. And similarly, when money and resource sharing got to a high level of seven figures, and it all came collapsing down and they lost it, and it was due to the lack of spiritual foundation. It was a lot of patterns that I'm starting to see in the dynamics. Rather, it happened in terms of the how long it lasted, rather it lasted 2 years or 5 years. What I started to see is how very important it is to take that spiritual foundation in this structure in non-monogamy, because it's very, very, very important. I started to think about even my life personally, right? And this has a lot to do with soul paths and destinies, and we'll get into that. But I just want to talk about this key point of what revelations that I've had about living in this world on earth and accumulating wealth and generational wealth with an understanding of how not to be bound and enslaved by materialism. It was a lesson, right, that I'm still growing through this, right, in community, right? But I ultimately had something similar in a sense of my last marriage, where I talk a lot about on my channel, right? Ultimately, us ending, right, because I kept going down this path, right, of non-monogamy, generational wealth, coming together, because I started to understand deeper and deeper the spiritual foundation. And then for him, right, there's just lessons that he needed to learn on family principles, right? It doesn't matter if you understand certain financial terminology. If you don't understand family principles and skills and why, like as a human, then you will not be able to access that type of standard of living, because that's abundant, right? So I'm saying that to say, I know what it's like to, you know, do poly, right, with someone and lose everything, and then having to start over, right? And so for me, right, that happened to me as well. And when I look at all of the lessons that I learned through that, it always pointed back to me and the level of seriousness that I have to hold in the spiritual life system that I practice and that we practice with the Maji community. And everything that we educate on is built on that foundation. So if you're interested in learning more about that, if been through different things on your poly journey and you're like, okay, I'm ready. I want to get out of toxicity. I want to get out of these loops, patterns. I want to break generational curses. If you want to get to the deeper meaning behind this relationship structure outside of surface level relating, then we have that in the Maji Community Mystery School. Just click the link in my descriptions. We have a library of courses. We also have our upcoming session, which is called the Poly Shadow Work Group Session. This is for everyone who gets the Poly Shadow Workbook. We are going over the shadow work and the inner healing and tapping into our inner sovereignty with the exercises and just abundance of information from our life system so that we can understand what the spiritual foundation is that we need to thrive in non-monogamous and polyamorous relationship structures. So this is going to be next Wednesday, August the 26th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So just get your copy of the Poly Shadow Workbook and you will have access. You can get your copy at AshaSekhmet.com/store. And I wanted to just tie all of these different scenarios in, with these stories back to, especially in all of these stories, these were people of African descent and people of indigenous descent that looks like me. When I say indigenous, like people that looks like me. So this is even more important because the trap here is, if you think of money and, materialism in this realm, the lessons that I've learned is that that's actually what will keep you trapped in cycles of poverty. That will keep you trapped in cycles of mundane life, like mediocrity. That will keep you trapped in that because there's lessons that need to be learned. There's nothing bad about living a life that's more normal, right? That's not bad. But I will say, it can be hurtful, if your soul path is trying to evolve to a different level, right? But your ego keeps sabotaging, what is truly meant for you and soul alignment, right? So that's why with the Poly Shadow Workbook, that's why we cover the ego. You cannot do this without conquering the ego. You cannot do this without fighting that. Okay, this is so important. The challenge is internal when we talk about this level of work to be able to successfully carry out thriving communities through non-monogamous relationship structures, right? That takes a lot of spiritual foundation, and that's why it's called ethical non-monogamy, right? There's ethical practices. So that's why we have a spiritual guide that helps us, maintain our morals and ethics while practicing this type of lifestyle, right? Because when you have more people involved in relationship dynamics, and building community, that means that there's a greater cost when your ego gets involved. More people get hurt, right? When you are, in your ego. So this is why the Poly Shadow Workbook is so imperative. And this is why I was led to start with this foundation, because we have to, right? Even when we look at the toxicity, chaos, lower surface level relating, lustful desires, greed, all these different things, control, dominance, power dynamics. When we look at all of those different things that happen in, human relationships, or non-monogamous relationships, it always comes down to just people being in their ego. They need the spiritual foundation, if it calls for them in their path, right? So that brings us to, soul paths and destinies. So people who have a spiritual path, to be able to be a part of something like this and building community, then, we have destinies, right? So that's very important. Okay, so this is why, I always say that we are about building what like-minded souls, right? So this gets really deep, and the Poly Shadow Workbook is there so that you have a navigation system to align you more with your soul and the type of poly dynamic that would fit more with your soul rather than your ego. The ego is saying what I want, I desire, my connection. That's ego. Soul is something different. So get the Poly Shadow Workbook, and it will definitely break it down and help you identify that, so that you're navigating and evolving, with your soul to connect with the Most High. Because ultimately, we're using these relationship structures in community to become one with the Creator of the universe, right? So that is a privilege, and it is an honor, right? And in the Maji community, we teach that the kingdom of heaven is within, right? So when we think about, aspects of wealth building and being able to come together at a higher level with, you know, ownership and sovereignty, it's not materialism. It's not about that. Now, I understand sometimes people will say, well, you live in this, you live on earth, so you need land and things like that. But the fact that you would say that means that you're missing the point entirely. you know, this is the difference between, I believe people who do have access to, more resources and they do really great work in the world versus people who, have lost a lot of their money and things like that because, they're not, they're not fully being used by, I would say, the creator of the universe to do good. That's the best way I could try to frame it. But ultimately, I just wanted to, close this out with like the original statement that I said in the beginning about, every time I see these different stories about polyamory failing when money and resource sharing starts getting involved at a certain level, and it all comes crumbling and those relationship dynamics fail, it's ultimately because people are not learning their lessons, right? Spiritually. So where we're going with the Maji community, and even with my husband and I, as we're building intentional community and how serious this is why I don't show everything. I can't, because we're talking about souls, right? We're talking about souls evolving, right? So I honor that, right? We honor that. This is, to us, this is not about to show off, you know, things to make people think a certain way, or to impress people, right? So even when we think about that, especially of people of African descent, I think ultimately that's the trap. That's the trap that will keep your soul bound here. And when I say that, I mean, there's a great book, my husband, one of the first books that he gave me, which is called The 5 a.m. Club. And it really goes over, it's like in the story, it's, I'm not going to spoil it, but a man who is a billionaire and he owns an island and he's at a seminar and he almost looked homeless, and he connected with two people there. The storyline is like an artist and an entrepreneur, and the author of that book, I think ultimately is trying to get you to understand that true wealth is, for me, this is how I'm interpreting and connecting the dots for my revelations, that real wealth is beyond this earth. And what do I mean by that? You can have heaven on earth, but the creator of the universe is much bigger than earth. It's much bigger than this. So if you're connected to that, right? You're connected to the source, you're connected to the cosmos, to do good, to serve, to impact your community and humanity, then God can use you in those ways, right? As favor as you are in servitude, right? However, the trap is, people who are not ready for that level of freedom. And that's okay too, right? That's okay too, because we all have our lifetimes. We go through cycles as humans. And the main thing that we're here to do is learn lessons, right? So I don't speak here from a place of looking down on anyone or anything, because I'm still learning, right? I'm still gaining more information day by day, but I'm speaking from true experience and observation from the intense initiations that I've been through. And then, going out there in my purpose and really talking with people in this field on, the polyamorous journey. And people have been doing this and been learning lessons, and I'm collecting all the information and my shared experience to say, okay, what is it that we're missing, especially for people of African descent. And I say that just because I noticed that there's some patterns there for us too. And, that's like a whole nother conversation for why, certain things like that is happening, in our communities when we try to do this. But ultimately, what has been revealed to me from the universe, the answer is it's because of spirituality, right? Not learning your spiritual lessons, right? So the point is not to think that we are above the creator, right? We're not above the creator, any of us, but we're one with it, right? So that's the ideal of it. If you do enough inner work to find yourself, you will be connected with the creator internally. And that is where the true wealth lies, internally. And when you have children, you pass that down, family values. That's generational wealth, not the material things that you can see with the two eyes, right? That can come too, but I'm saying what is allowing for that frequency to be held of abundance is that internal wealth of being connected to the creator. That is what allows that. And that's helping. That's your bloodline. So then you're passing down generational wealth on a soul level. So I just wanted to come and share this. Let me know in the comments, what are your thoughts about this? Have you all had any experiences with this, with poly, and money getting involved and people switching up? Would love to hear y'all stories, because at the end of the day, it sounds good and all when we talk about connections and all that, but over here we talking about community building. I started poly from the aspect of community. I'm not in this for anything else. I desire community and growth. I like growing. So the reason why I say this is because that's why we have to talk about the economics. It's very important. People that want to ignore those things and they're not able to tie the pieces together. Like I said, in the Maji community, this is our foundation. We found it on spirituality so we can connect the group economics and live a holistic lifestyle of natural bliss. That's the ideal, because we have a pathway, a spiritual system that helps you to transcend, right? So to be able to connect all these pieces and truly live in that level of soul freedom as a community, that means that we're operating in our superior human nature, right? That's our birthright, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it's not easy. It's not easy. But, the commitment is there. If it's in your destiny, if it's in your life path, this is what we have here with the Maji community. So, yes, so tap in with us at the next session that we have, the Poly Shadow Work Group session. Next Wednesday, August 26th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Make sure you grab your copy of the Poly Shadow Workbook and start doing those exercises so that we are continuing to thrive in this new world. This should be very exciting. The more, you do that inner work and you can conquer, that your own, darkness and go into that inner growth, the other side of that is bliss. So don't neglect the work. Right? All right. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to my channel, And stay tuned because we have a lot of things coming up with the Maji community. So you can apply to our community on school, and it's free, right, to apply, and just stay tapped in with everything that we have going on. And then if you want a consultation with me one-on-one, you can book that on my website, AshaSekhmet.com. And I will see you all in the next video.